You ever get that feeling like you're just wading through this jungle of to-dos and expectations and relationship quirks, and you just think, wow, how did everything get so complicated? It's easy to feel like life is just inherently messy. But what if? What if that feeling is the mess and the reality underneath is maybe surprisingly simple?
That's a really intriguing idea, and it's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're diving deep into the concepts from The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga.
Right.
The book is basically this dialogue, a conversation between a philosopher and a young man, and they explore these core ideas of Adlerian psychology.
Exactly. And this isn't just like some abstract theory floating out there. Our mission really in this deep dive is to pull out the really powerful nuggets from this Adlerian viewpoint.
Yeah.
We're talking about ideas that might make you rethink your usual explanations for problems or, what you're chasing after for happiness, and definitely that tricky world of getting along with other people.
Prepare for some potential shifts in perspective, I think.
Definitely.
So the philosopher, he kicks things off with a statement that's pretty much guaranteed to raise an eyebrow. This world is astonishingly simple, and life itself is too.
Which, yeah, I'm sure is exactly what people might be thinking simple. Really. The young man in the book certainly doesn't buy it at first.
Not at all.
He immediately throws back all the real world stuff. The weight of adult responsibilities, the knots we tie ourselves in with relationships, and then the bigger things, society stuff like discrimination, war, inequality.
He even contrasts it with a child's view, suggesting they see it as simpler only because they're kind of shielded from all that complexity.
Right. He argues that as we get older, we lose that innocent perspective. We see the harsher realities, the things that seem impossible, maybe the feeling that everyone's just, looking out for number one.
Yeah, how can anyone face that and still see the world as simple? That's his question.
And the philosopher's response, it really cuts right to the heart of it. He's not saying these complexities don't exist, but he argues that the complexity isn't in the world itself.
Okay.
It's in how we see it, how we interpret it. It's not some objective difficulty tripping us up, but the subjective meaning we each assign.
Ah, so it's about our perception. He emphasizes that your experience of the world, my experience, it's unique. It's our own subjective reality.
Precisely. And that idea, our subjective world, that's really the foundation for understanding Adlerian psychology, which he then introduces.
Right. He calls it this other philosophy rooted in the work of Alfred Adler, an Austrian psychiatrist, early 20th century.
And it's interesting how he links it back even to Greek philosophy, those fundamental ideas about living well. He mentions Freud and Jung, obviously the big names, but notes Adler was actually an original member of Freud's Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, part of that inner circle.
What's really fascinating, though, is Adler's own prediction about his work. He apparently thought his name might eventually fade away.
Oh.
Not because his ideas would be forgotten, but because they'd become so commonplace, so ingrained in how we understand people, that they wouldn't necessarily be tagged as Adlerian anymore.
Wow. Like he hoped his insights would just become common sense eventually?
Kind of, yeah. And the book touches on how his ideas have subtly influenced people like Dale Carnegie,
Right.
How to Win Friends and Influence People, and Stephen Covey's 7 Habits.
Right. Makes you wonder how much of this stuff is already floating around in our thinking without us even realizing the source.
Exactly. So with that set up our subjective reality, Adlerian psychology, the conversation shifts to a really critical distinction. Etiology versus teleology.
Okay, break that down. Etiology.
Etiology is basically cause and effect, looking backwards. The young man thinks this way naturally.
Like his example of the reclusive friend. Assuming the past abuse caused the current isolation.
Precisely. That's how we usually connect the dots, right? Past event leads to present situation.
That seems logical.
But the philosopher challenges this with teleology. Instead of the cause, teleology asks about the purpose. What's the goal of the behavior now?
Purpose.
Yeah.
Okay, so it rejects the idea that our past just locks us into our present and future.
Exactly. He argues, look, if past trauma was the only determinant, wouldn't everyone with a similar history end up exactly the same?
That's a good point. You see wildly different outcomes from similar hardships.
So the philosopher suggests the friend's anxiety and fear aren't necessarily the reason he stays in, but maybe they were unconsciously created to fulfill the purpose of avoiding social interaction.
Whoa, okay. That flips it completely. The anxiety serves the goal. It doesn't cause the behavior.
Right. It's a different lens. So the key takeaway here for listeners might be shifting from asking, why did this happen to me, to what am I maybe gaining or avoiding right now in this situation? Focusing on present purpose.
Present purpose, not just past causes. Got it.
He uses a great analogy, too. If you have a cold, you're not satisfied if the doctor only tells you, well, you were underdressed. You want treatment for the symptoms now.
Okay, yeah, you want something for the cough, the fever.
Similarly, Adlerian psychology, with this teleological view, focuses on the current purpose of our behaviors and feelings, not just tracing their origins.
Which leads to that really provocative idea. Denying trauma in the typical cause and effect sense.
Yeah.
That it's not your fault, idea gets challenged.
It pushes us to consider the present purpose, even of deep-seated anxieties, rather than seeing ourselves purely as victims of the past.
Okay. So, building on that, what about emotions? Like anger.
Another interesting flip, the philosopher suggests we don't get angry and then shout. We get angry in order to shout.
Anger is a tool.
Exactly. A means to an end. The goal comes first.
The example he uses is a mother yelling at her daughter. So.
Yeah. Is it an uncontrollable outburst? Or is it perhaps a tool she's using, maybe unconsciously, to assert authority, to make her daughter listen quickly?
So anger isn't just something that happens to us.
He suggested something we can potentially take out as needed and put away, which sounds a bit calculated, maybe.
No, a little cold.
But it highlights this idea that we might have more control, more agency over our emotional responses than we typically think. Think of it less like a wave washing over you and more like a strategy you might be deploying.
Even unconsciously.
Even unconsciously. This is where Adlerian psychology really stands against determinism, the idea that we're just puppets of our past or our emotions. It stresses our power to choose.
And that power to choose leads right into the concept of lifestyle. And this pretty blunt statement, unhappiness is something you choose for yourself.
Oh, that's a tough one to swallow sometimes.
Definitely.
He introduces lifestyle here. And it's not just about, your hobbies or where you live. In Adlerian terms, it's your fundamental patterns of thinking and behaving. Your character, your worldview.
Like your mental default settings.
Kind of, yeah. Your ingrained tendencies. And crucially, this lifestyle isn't set in stone from birth. It's something you choose, even if that choice happens gradually, unconsciously over time.
The young man pushes back on that, right? Saying he doesn't remember choosing his personality.
Understandably. But the philosopher insists if you chose it, even without realizing it, then you have the power to choose a new one. Anytime.
So if you're stuck in unhappiness, it's not just bad luck or external forces. It's a chosen lifestyle.
That's the Adlerian perspective. Maybe chosen unintentionally, but chosen nonetheless. And the difficulty in changing. It isn't about lacking the ability. It's often about a persistent decision not to change.
Sticking with the familiar, even if it's uncomfortable. The devil you know.
Exactly. And making that leap, choosing differently, requires courage.
Yeah.
You have the anxiety of changing versus the perhaps predictable disappointment of staying the same.
Which is why they call it a psychology of courage.
Precisely. Unhappiness from this view isn't mainly because of your past or your environment, but maybe a lack of courage to actively choose to be happy, to change your lifestyle.
Oh, wow. Okay, and this idea of choice and purpose, it even extends to physical or psychological symptoms, like the example of the student afraid of blushing.
Yeah, the philosopher shares that story. The Adlerian lens suggests looking for the goal behind the symptom.
And in her case, the goal was.
He proposes her fear of blushing might have actually served as a way to avoid confessing feelings for someone she liked, because she was ultimately afraid of rejection.
So the blushing became a convenient excuse. I can't tell him. I might blush.
Sort of, yes. It prevents her from taking the risk. So the focus shifts from how do I stop blushing to how do I accept myself, blushing and all, and find the courage to act anyway.
That's what they call encouragement, moving forward despite limitations.
Yes, accepting myself now and finding the courage to step forward.
Which leads nicely into feelings of inferiority. These aren't objective facts.
According to the philosopher, no, they're subjective assumptions, usually born from comparing yourself to others.
Right, comparing yourself to people who seem more successful or happier or whatever.
Even physical things, like the young man worrying about his acne, can get tangled up in these feelings.
But feeling inferior isn't inherently bad.
Not necessarily. The philosopher points out it can actually be a positive thing, a stimulant, he calls it, a launch pad for growth and striving, if you use it constructively.
Okay, so it can motivate you.
Yeah.
But when does it become a problem?
When it turns into an inferiority complex, that's when someone uses their perceived flaws as an excuse. A is the situation, so B cannot be done. You know, I'm not smart enough, so I can't apply for that job.
Using it to avoid challenges.
Exactly. And then there's the flip side, the superiority complex.
Ah, the person who seems overly confident.
Adlerian psychology sees that often as compensation. Someone feels intensely inferior but lacks the courage for healthy striving, so they puff themselves up, act superior to mask the underlying insecurity.
Like they're trying too hard to convince themselves and everyone else.
It can often look like that, yeah. It's a way to feel special without putting in the actual work.
This all connects back to the idea that life isn't supposed to be a competition, right?
Right. Well, we obviously have differences. Age, gender, knowledge, whatever. Adlerian psychology stresses fundamental equality. We are not the same, but we are equal.
And the problem with constantly competing is?
It inevitably breeds those feelings of inferiority because you're always measuring, always comparing. You start seeing others not as comrades, but as rivals, even enemies.
And that constant need for recognition, for validation from others.
Often stems from focusing too much on your own perceived shortcomings, needing others to tell you you're okay.
Yeah.
And here's a bit of relief, maybe. The philosopher points out the world isn't constantly watching and judging you nearly as much as you probably think it is.
We're usually our own harshest critics.
Often, yes. Our self-consciousness magnifies things.
Okay, so if life isn't a competition, how does this view handle conflict?
Yeah.
Power struggles, revenge.
Well, the philosopher suggests even anger towards bigger things like society or the government might sometimes be less about pure principle and more a way to, push your own views, assert yourself, a sort of power play.
Blurring the line between righteous indignation and just wanting to be right.
Potentially. He distinguishes personal grudges from that broader, less self-interested anger. But when it comes to direct personal attacks, he says responding in kind, getting angry back.
You've entered the power struggle.
Exactly. You're playing their game. You've fallen for the provocation, which might have been their unconscious goal all along.
And that goal can often be revenge.
He suggests it frequently is, especially once a relationship really sours. And once revenge is the goal, resolution is incredibly difficult.
So the advice is?
Step down. Consciously choose not to react to the provocation. Refuse to enter the struggle.
Is that about suppressing anger?
Not necessarily suppressing the feeling itself, but recognizing that anger is a form of communication, often a clumsy one. You can usually make your point, set boundaries, disagree, without resorting to the emotion of anger, which tends to escalate things.
Focusing on winning or losing the argument just clouds your judgment anyway.
Absolutely. It stops you from seeing clearly or being willing to admit you might be wrong.
This focus on how we relate to each other seems absolutely central. Leads to that big statement. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems.
It's a bold claim, isn't it? But he argues that when we see others as adversaries, as threats, it often stems from a lack of courage to engage with what he calls life tasks.
Life tasks, what are those?
The fundamental challenges we all face. He breaks them down into three main areas: tasks of work, tasks of friendship, and tasks of love.
Okay, work seems obvious. You have to cooperate, interact with colleagues, bosses, clients.
Right. It inherently involves other people. Friendship, he says, isn't just about how many friends you have. It's about the distance and depth.
Distance and depth.
Yeah, like can you feel connected even if you haven't seen someone in ages? Can you pick up where you left off? That kind of quality connection.
I see. And tasks of love.
That covers both romantic relationships and family ties, especially parent-child relationships. And his view on healthy love is really insightful.
How so?
It's about being able to be completely yourself with the other person. No need to feel inferior, no need to flaunt superiority, just genuine connection. He argues that restrictions, control, possessiveness in a relationship, that's often a sign of distrust, not love.
Treating each other as equals.
Equal personalities, yes.
Okay, so these life tasks are where our problems arise. How does discarding other people's tasks fit in?
This is another key concept. It flows from understanding relationships. He gives the example of disliking someone for their flaws.
Yeah.
He suggests that if you've already, on some level, decided you want to end the relationship or distance yourself, you can always find flaws to justify it. You manufacture the reason after the fact.
Looking for evidence to support a pre-existing feeling.
Kind of, and this ties into the danger of constantly seeking recognition, needing approval. He links that back to reward and punishment education.
How so?
We get conditioned, from a young age perhaps, to do things to get praise or avoid punishment, rather than following our own internal compass, doing what we feel is right or important.
Living to meet others' expectations.
Exactly. He stresses, you are not living your life to satisfy other people's expectations. And crucially, they aren't living theirs to satisfy yours either. Getting upset when someone doesn't act how you want, that's often you trying to impose your rules on them.
That's where asking whose task is this comes in handy.
Hugely important. The example of the child's homework is classic. Studying, fundamentally, is the child's task.
But parents often feel it's their job to make the child study.
Right. But the philosopher argues that by constantly forcing, nagging, hovering, the parent is actually intruding on the child's task. They're taking responsibility away from the child.
And that causes conflict.
So many interpersonal troubles, he says, come from this. Either intruding on others' tasks or having others intrude on yours. Even within families, this separation is vital.
So what's the parent's task then?
Believing in the child, supporting them, that's your task. How the child responds to that belief, whether they study or not, that's their task.
That requires a lot of trust, letting go.
It does. And worrying constantly about what others think of you, that's essentially taking on their task of forming an opinion about you.
Wow. Okay. He even applies this teleologically to getting angry at your boss.
Right. Yeah. Instead of just, my boss is unfair, therefore I'm unhappy, ideology, the teleological view might ask, could the purpose of my anger be to create an excuse to avoid work or to avoid confronting my own feelings of inadequacy?
Always looking for the current goal.
Always looking for the current goal. Ultimately, separating tasks is presented as the essential first step to lightening life's load and finding freedom in relationships. Define what's yours and let go of what isn't.
But it's not the end goal itself, just separating tasks.
No, exactly. It's the gateway, the means to build better relationships, not just isolate yourself. He uses the analogy of reading a book.
Right. You need some distance to see clearly. Too close and it's blurry, too far and you can't read it.
Perfect. Relationships need that optimal distance too. Close enough for connection and support, but not so close that you're encroaching, controlling, or taking over their responsibilities.
And this isn't the same as those transactional relationships like, I did this for you, now you owe me.
Definitely not. That's based on obligation and expectation, not the mutual respect that comes from separating tasks.
And intervening, even with good intentions, can be harmful, like the parent tying the kid's shoes.
Exactly. It seems helpful, quicker maybe, but it robs the child of the chance to learn, to struggle, to succeed, to build that competence and courage.
Which brings us back to courage, and maybe the most famous phrase from the book. The courage to be disliked.
It sounds harsh, but it follows directly from separating tasks. If you stop trying to manage everyone's expectations and approval, if you live according to your own principles and respect others' tasks,
You inevitably won't please everyone. Someone might dislike your choices.
and you need the courage to accept that possibility, to not let the fear of disapproval dictate your life.
The philosopher also links this back to physical symptoms, like blushing again.
Yeah, reminding us that mind and body are connected, and symptoms can serve these interpersonal goals. He then introduces community feeling as the real foundation for healthy relationships.
Community feeling, what does that entail?
It's about shifting from pure self-interest, what's in it for me, to a broader social interest. How can I contribute? It involves three key things:
Okay, what are they?
self-acceptance, confidence in others, and contribution to others.
All right, let's take those one by one. Self-acceptance.
It's not about liking everything or thinking you're perfect. It's about accepting the irreplaceable, this me, flaws and all, as you are right now, while still having the courage to change what can be changed.
Kind of like the Serenity Prayer. Accept what you can't change, change what you can.
Very similar energy, yes. Accept your starting point without judgment. Then, confidence in others. This is different from just trust.
How so?
Trust is often conditional, based on past behavior or collateral. Adlerian confidence is more like unconditional belief in others' fundamental worth and potential, even knowing they might let you down sometimes.
That sounds risky. You could get taken advantage of.
You could. The philosopher acknowledges that. But he argues that the alternative, constant doubt and suspicion, makes it impossible to build deep, meaningful relationships. The goal is the deep relationship, and confidence is the necessary risk you take.
So you choose to believe, despite the risks, for the sake of connection.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on the few who might dislike you or betray your confidence, focus on the potential for connection with the many others. This relates to the harmony of life.
Harmony of life.
Yeah, like seeing life tasks, work, friendship, love as interconnected, not separate boxes. He critiques workaholism, for instance, as sometimes being a way to avoid other life tasks, lacking that harmony.
Interesting. And the third part was contribution to others.
This is where happiness comes in, according to Adler. True happiness is the feeling of contribution, the sense that I am useful to someone, I am making a difference, however small.
So it's not about getting recognition for contributing.
Seeking recognition might be a way we try to feel useful, but if it means living by other standards, it's not true happiness because it lacks freedom.
Yeah.
When you cultivate genuine community feeling, that desperate need for external validation tends to fade. The feeling of contribution itself is enough.
Wow. Okay. This leads to another surprising idea. The courage to be normal.
Yeah, seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? We often value being special. The philosopher points out this universal drive for the pursuit of superiority, wanting to improve, be better.
Which sounds positive.
It can be, but sometimes it gets twisted. People might seek attention, try to feel special by acting out being either exceptionally good or exceptionally bad. Problem behavior, essentially.
As a shortcut, an easy pursuit of superiority.
Exactly. A way to get noticed without the hard work of genuine contribution. And interestingly, he suggests that constantly scolding problem behavior can sometimes reinforce it by giving that person the attention they crave.
So what's the alternative?
Self-acceptance. Having the courage to just be, well, normal, ordinary. Not equating being normal with being incapable or mediocre, but finding value in yourself without needing to be drastically different.
Just being okay with being you.
Finding peace in your inherent worth. And this ties into living in the here and now.
Right, we're rejecting the idea of life as just preparation for some future goal.
Yes, the philosopher challenges putting life on hold, always thinking once I achieve X, then I'll be happy. He argues life isn't a line stretching from past to future.
It's a series of moments.
A series of dots, series of nows. So rigid life planning, obsessing over the destination becomes less important than the quality of the journey right now.
He calls it energia. Like
Yeah.
the process itself is the fulfillment.
Exactly, like dancing. The joy is in the movement, the dancing itself, not just in reaching the end of the song or arriving somewhere. It's about finding fulfillment in the activity of living, moment by moment.
So shine a light on the here and now. Do what you can do right now, earnestly, conscientiously.
That's the essence. He calls not living in the present the greatest life lie. Getting lost in invented pasts or imagined futures and completely missing the only reality we actually have, which is right now.
So if life doesn't have some grand, preordained meaning, how do we navigate it?
The philosopher offers a guiding star, a compass,
Yeah.
contribution to others. If you orient yourself by asking, how can I contribute? That leads towards freedom and purpose. It doesn't matter so much if you're liked or disliked in the process.
If your focus is on contributing,
Then happiness, that feeling of contribution, arises naturally.
so wow, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into Adlerian psychology, you can really see how these ideas offer a totally different way of looking at things, can't you?
Absolutely. The power of perspective, shifting from cause to purpose, the freedom that comes with realizing you choose your lifestyle, untangling relationships by separating tasks, focusing on now, on contribution. It's a lot.
It really is.
Yeah.
We hope that exploring these concepts gives you, our listener, maybe a new framework, a different lens for your own challenges. Perhaps makes things feel a little, well, simpler, like the philosopher suggested at the start.
Yeah, maybe the complexity was in the way we were looking at it all along.
Could be. So with that in mind, here's a final thought to take with you. Think about the lifestyle, those patterns of thought and action that you might be living right now, maybe without even fully realizing it. It was maybe one small step, something you could do today, right now, to align that lifestyle a bit more with a sense of purpose or contribution or just personal freedom, regardless of the past, regardless of future worries.
It's a powerful question to sit with. We really encourage you to reflect on these Adlerian ideas and see if they resonate, see how they might apply to your own unique journey.